Good afternoon. Thank you for joining us. I'm excited to welcome you to today's webinar, Conversations with Patti Davis, Reflections and Guidance from a Caregiver's Journey with Alzheimer's. My name is Robert May, and I'm the Executive Director of the Kensington here in sunny Redondo Beach, California. Let me tell you a little bit about who we are and where you may find us. First of all, Kensington Senior Living was founded in 2010 by a leadership team with over 30 years of experience developing and operating premier senior living residences in the United States and abroad. We understand the difficult decision in placing a loved one in a senior retirement community. The Kensington promise is simple yet profound: to love and care for your family as we do our own. It is core to the belief that no aspect of caregiving is more important than our partnership with our residents and families at every stage. We have two communities in Southern California, one in Redondo Beach and another in Sierra Madre. In addition, we have a dedicated memory care community in Redwood City, California, and our newest community unveiled this past year in Reston, Virginia. We also have three additional communities situated in White Plains, New York, Kensington, Maryland, and Falls Church, Virginia. What we do is provide exceptional assisted living and extraordinary memory care solutions for our families. We have two distinct and very unique neighborhoods in memory care. One is called Connections and the other Haven. Connections is for early onset cognitive impairment, and Haven specializes in supporting advanced cognitive decline. These are two unique settings that support our residents through different stages and journeys. But for today's event, let me introduce the moderators for this afternoon's event. First of all, Marianne Shuko is with All's Authors and is their founder. All's Authors, I'd just like to say, Marianne, it's just a stunning compendium of information, of blogs, podcasts, everything you need to know, and a really great bookstore. So please tell us about yourself and about All's Authors. Welcome.
Thank you so much, Robert. It's a privilege to be here with you today. I am really flattered by your comments on All's Authors. It is a passion project for me and for our management team. All of us are volunteers. We have all been caregivers to someone we loved with Alzheimer's, and we have all written our stories in books. And that inspired us, three of us, back in 2015, to get together to help cross-promote each other's books and to raise awareness of Alzheimer's and dementia. We did not know each other. We were all strangers, but we met online as authors and connected that way and decided that we would pool our resources together for 1 month and do a simple project just to raise awareness of what we had to offer and what was going on with Alzheimer's and dementia. And here we are now. It's 7 years later. We have 300 authors. We have a podcast, a bookstore. We have hundreds of books in our collection. All of the books have been vetted by the management team, all authors, all caregivers, so you can be assured of their quality. And we are here to help family caregivers and those living with Alzheimer's or dementia diagnosis to find quality resources to guide them on their journey. And one of our initiatives, the most recent one, is our custom caregiver collections, which I think you may be familiar with, where we help put together a collection of books for an assisted living or nursing facility or a support group, a memory cafe, any place where caregivers gather. And we will select books for you according to your needs that you can use as a lending library to share with your membership. So that's one of our new things. We have as few as 3 books in a bag, up to like the bookshelves that are going to be at Kensington and are currently at one of your facilities, not Redondo Beach yet, but I forget the name of it. Redwood City.
Yes, and soon to be Redondo Beach as well.
Yes. And that is so exciting because we just are really passionate about getting written resources into the hands of caregivers, and so that they can read somebody else's story or get information. Storytelling is an essential part of caregiving. That's what we believe, and that's our mission. So we're really happy to be partnered with Kensington.
Well, thank you. That's a fabulous amount of work that's gone into this and to create this great organization that really, of course, supports caregivers. And that's so important to help us provide the care that we ultimately provide for our residents and families. In addition to Marianne, I would like to introduce our Susan Evans, who, if you've been following our podcast, is a regular contributor. And Susan, welcome. Please say a few words and also, of course, share some housekeeping tips for us, because I think you've got some really great information to let people know about how this is going to unfold and surprises at the end.
Thank you, Robert, and thank you, Marianne. And I must say, it's been a pleasure to partner with All's Authors. What a great resource. My story with Kensington Senior Living is a little different, but I would first of all really like to thank Kensington for producing these amazing webinars as a gift to our community. My father was diagnosed with Alzheimer's 11 years ago. In 2016, we made the hardest decision we've ever made. We decided to place my father in a community because having him at home was taking its toll on my mother. We chose Kensington Senior Living in Northern California as it is the gold standard in memory care. I did not want to lose both my parents to this dreadful disease. It was the best decision, yet hardest decision we ever made, as it gave my mother their relationship back, as it eliminated the struggle. My father lived at Kensington for almost 7 years. They all took exceptional care of him and my entire family. As Robert said and Marianne alluded to, there are more than 36 million caregivers in the US alone. On an average, with each diagnosis, there are directly 6 caregivers impacted. You're in for such a special treat today. I've had the pleasure to get to know Patti Davis and have devoured her books. Please type any questions you may have in the Q&A function of Zoom. If we do not get to your question, feel free to email us. You will all receive an email in the next few days with a copy of the webinar to share with friends and family, and links to purchase these amazing books, and also information on All's Authors, a special partner with Kensington. Robert, back to you.
Thank you, Susan. I am now honored to introduce our guest for this afternoon, Patti Davis. Patti Davis is an author, activist, advocate, and daughter of our 40th President of the United States. She has written poignant, sensitive recollections about her father, Ronald Reagan, and his Alzheimer's disease, in both The Long Goodbye and now her latest book, Floating in the Deep End book. She has also created a support group for caregivers of people with dementia called Beyond Alzheimer's. Floating in the Deep End is an extension of that support group, a handbook for those on the perilous and sorrowful journey at times of losing a loved one to this mysterious disease. It is also part memoir. It is also part of the memories of her own dementia journey that have taken on different resonance with time and reflections. She hopes that caregivers and readers find her guidance and comfort in this book. Patti, we welcome you.
Hi, thank you so much for having me, and thank you for everyone who's tuning in, and I hope this will be interesting and comforting and enlightening for everybody.
Thank you.
Hi, Patti.
Hi.
It's good to see you again. I just want to mention that, Patti is one of our All's Authors, so we're very, very proud to have her in our organization. And it's great to be here with you tonight. I'd like to start off with asking you to just tell us a little bit about your personal dementia journey with your dad. How did that start out?
Well, my father was diagnosed in 1994 when nobody was really talking about the disease. So I quickly realized, suddenly the Reagan family was like the poster family for Alzheimer's, but yet it was a disease no one was talking about. I was living in New York at the time, and, people recognized me on the street or whatever, they would often tell me things about their own experience with a parent or a grandparent or whatever, but they give me like snippets of information. And I wrote in Floating in the Deep End that I sort of felt like I was in the French underground, like I get little tidbits of information, but never the whole story. So I realized pretty much right out of the gate that I was going to have to figure this out on my own. And I was going to have to go on this journey and learn as I went. And, it's a very lonely journey, and way down the line, it's why I started my support group program. I didn't want people to be lonely on this journey. However, I have to say that for me, it worked to my advantage, because the things that I ended up bringing to Beyond Alzheimer's, the principles and the ideas that I used to create that book, I came up with within that sort of lonely sphere. It was kind of like beginner's luck. There was nobody to tell me I was doing it wrong. So I just did what felt right to me and what my instincts told me. Right. So it ended up being okay for me, an okay journey for me in that respect.
Mm-hmm. There is a lot of stigma attached to a dementia diagnosis. And as you said, a lot of silence that surrounds the disease. Many families, they want to keep it a private matter, and they don't speak of it outside the family. And yet your situation was so different because of whom your dad was. You said that he was the poster boy. So you didn't have that luxury of right. keeping this private. How did that affect your family, and how did it affect him?
I don't know that it affected him one way or the other. I think it was for me and maybe also for him. I think it was actually comforting, because there were all these people around who knew this about him. There was no hiding it. It elicited compassion for people who I'm sure some of whom I'm sure did not agree with him politically and were opposed to him in whatever ways that they were, but treated him with compassion because of the disease that he had. And I do think that it helped other people be more open about the disease in their own families. It's like, if we could be open about it, why can't someone else who's not in the public eye be open about it? I mean, it's a lot easier if you really step back and look at it. It's a lot easier to say that your loved one has dementia than allow people to assume things that aren't true. They're going to see that whether they're still going to a job and in the workplace or they're interacting with friends, people are going to notice that something is different with that person. So they're not going to immediately go, oh, well, they probably have dementia. They're going to think, uh-oh, are they on drugs? Have they been drinking? Mm-hmm. It's better to just be upfront and say that this is what the situation is.
Yeah. They say that Alzheimer's and dementia, they're the great equalizer.
Yeah, they are. And I think that, a lot of the reason that people don't want to talk about it is that they're afraid that they're going to get it. And there's this sort of irrational fear, like, if I talk about it, then I'm more likely to get it, which of course makes no logical sense. But I think people think we just won't talk about it and then I'll never get it. Right.
Right.
We don't always logically.
No, it's not a contagious disease, that's for sure. Although it could be genetic, so there is that vector, but it's not a contagious disease. Now, you mentioned that when your father was diagnosed at the time, you were in New York, and he and your mom, they lived in California, so you had like this vast country in between you. And how did that affect you, as a caregiver? Did you consider yourself a caregiver right away? Did you move back to California?
Yeah, I did move back to California after a few years. I was flying back and forth, and I couldn't sustain that. I mean, I was literally like running out of money. And so I moved back to California. I don't know that I used the word caregiver. I think that's a word that has evolved over all these years. I don't think in 1994 that was even a word. At least I don't remember using it. I just, I really approached this very sort of organically. I knew that I had to change. I knew that I had to grow up. I knew that I knew nothing about the journey that I was about to go on. And that those three words, I don't know, became sort of my mantra throughout the whole decade of my father's illness. And I don't mean that as a way of like being in denial or something like that. I mean that as a way to stay open to what is unfolding in front of you. I don't know how these stages are going to progress or when they're going to progress. I don't know how my father's going to be today when I go up to my parents' house, but I'm going to ask for guidance in accepting whatever comes at me. I have a friend right now whose husband has Alzheimer's, and and she's this very optimistic, positive person, and she starts every day like, "This is going to be a good day." Mm-hmm. And I said to her, well, maybe a healthier way to do this is to say, I don't know what kind of day it's going to be. Because if you start out saying, this is going to be a really good day, and then it's not, then you've let yourself in for a fall, I mean, saying it's going to be a terrible day is not a good idea either. But how about just, I don't know what this day is going to be, but I am going to try to accept whatever comes at me.
I could not agree more, Patti. It's like every day is like these hills and these valleys.
Yeah.
And you just don't know.
It can be a good day and a bad day.
Yeah, you gotta kind of adjust. I love the optimism part, but it's just hills and valleys, which brings me to a question that you alluded to a little bit earlier is how does one prepare? I know I struggled with this, but how does one prepare to parent your parents in that role reversal?
It's a tough one. I mean, it's a really tough one, no matter what your relationship is. I mean, it's sort of well known that my family is very fractured and was not a cohesive family. So I think, the bigger challenge for me was always with my mother and through this disease as well. So there were times when I felt like I had to sort of step up and be a little parental with her, which is hard. I mean, you have to kind of take a deep breath and go, oh, okay, I'm going to give this a try. It might not work. It was a little easier with my father because my father, was a very sweet, gentle person and remained a sweet, gentle person through Alzheimer's. And I've written in Floating in the Deep End how dementia is a stripping away. The person who has it is a stripping away down to the essence of who they are, which can be a good thing or a bad thing, depending on who they are. And, in my father's case, that sweetness remained. It didn't mean that he didn't get upset sometimes, but that gentleness remained. With my mother, it was more complicated. I mean, she was a huge figure in my life and a very intimidating figure in my life. So the few times when I said, hey, you know what, I don't think this is a good idea. How about let's do this? It was, I was sort of, my breath was caught in my throat while I was doing it. And I think that's true for anybody, even if they have a great relationship with a parent. It's a role reversal that is not comfortable. And you just have to take a deep breath and know that going into it. This is not going to be comfortable. And it may never get comfortable. You may always have to take a deep breath and steel yourself to do that.
It's complicated at a minimum. And was your mom in denial?
No, she was not in denial. But, I wrote about this, like my father had a basal cell on his face, and I understand this, she was going to have, this was way deep into Alzheimer's. She was already bedridden. She was going to have a dermatologist come and take it out, and she was worried that he'd be off, and she was worried that he'd be confused and scared at what was going on. And I said, excuse me, it's a basal cell. Like, it might grow in 10 years. He's bedridden. He has Alzheimer's. Why are you going to put him through this? Basal cell doesn't turn into melanoma. It's a basal cell, And she went, and it worked. And she went, oh, you're right. And I thought, oh my God, I just made a suggestion that she took. It was kind of shocking, but it was sort of taking a parental role, and in that instance, it worked. And like I said, I understand perfectly where she was coming from. Something is on the skin, you take it off, but she didn't sort of take a step back and look at the whole bit. I don't think that meant she was in denial. I think it just meant she was, doing what you usually do when things like this happen.
Like a caretaker. She wanted to take care of him.
Yeah, exactly.
And this is a great question, because I would love your perspective on this, and I'm sure our entire audience would too. But how does caregiving change the caregiver?
I think it changes you enormously if you show up for it. And if you show up for it, recognizing that, particularly if it's a parent, that you have to show up as an adult. Whatever your history is with that parent, you have to come to terms with that and let it go. Because if you're going to show up as the resentful 17-year-old, you're not going to do very well. And I know, when my father was diagnosed, I remember walking around the streets of Manhattan thinking, you know what, I have to grow up like now. I've had a really long post-adolescence, and I've hung on to my resentments for a long time. I got to grow up now, or I'm not going to be able to fully show up for this journey that I have no idea about, right? And part of the reason that I wanted to start a support group when I did was to bring that aspect into it. I didn't want to just do a support group about, like, what do I do when this happens? I wanted to go deeper, and I wanted to go, before you ask, what should I do in a situation, ask, who am I in the situation? Am I still that, resentful kid, or whatever, whatever your issues are with that parent, and everybody has some to one degree or another.
I think preparing yourself is the best advice ever. And I literally I've read the book so many times, and I've annotated the book, which I haven't done, I think, since college, because Robert said it perfectly. This is like my handbook. And I wish 11 years ago, I'd had this, because I constantly refer to things. It's enlightening, it's gentle, it's inspirational, it gives people encouragement. It's all dog-eared and annotated inside. So I can't thank you enough for sharing this with the world, really.
Well, that was my intention, to write a handbook. When I ran my support group for 6 years, twice a week, when I stopped running it in 2017, and I embarked on trying to license it to hospitals so that other people could pick up the ball and run with it. 2 hospitals licensed it, but I got a lot of no's, and it proved to me what I kind of already knew, that hospitals do not care enough about caregivers. And I think really I decided to write this book in out of a little bit of anger over that. I kind of thought, okay, fine, you're not going to license my support group, you're not going to give them hands-on here, I'm going to write a handbook and make this stuff available to people in that way, so that they can dog-ear it and write in it and refer to it as they need it.
Mm-hmm.
Wonderful. Marianne?
Yeah, that's really terrific that you decided to take that route, because I don't know that the hospitals are invested in supporting Alzheimer's caregivers or any kind of caregiver, really. So that really is terrific. anybody can pick up that book and have their own little pocket support group at home.
And
I
think it's, it's kind of appalling that hospitals don't, because they know full well statistically that caregivers of people with dementia are very likely to have health problems, stress-related problems. When the dementia patient the dementia patient doesn't have any stress. Every moment's new. Right? They're not stressed out. As soon as they get upset, it's over in 15 minutes and then they don't remember it. Right? The caregiver remembers it 15 days later. So they haven't, when I was running my support group, there were people who got ailments that I know were stress related. Mm-hmm. Right. And that's why I wanted hospitals to have this group, so that people could have a perception of this scary environment actually cares about me as a caregiver.
Mm-hmm.
Interestingly enough, my father died at 87. My mother's 87. They're the same age. My mother looks 10 years older than my father. When he passed away, I'm not kidding. He had the most beautiful skin. He didn't have a wrinkle on his face. And then I look at my mother and I go, wow, that really aged her. Yeah. And it is. It's all about stress, anxiety. Yeah. And so I could not agree more. I could not.
Yeah. And I think a lot of it might go back to the stigma attached to Alzheimer's and dementia as well, and the silence. And I know you mentioned your dad, his diagnosis was 1994. And at that time, people just weren't talking about this.
Right.
And I know because I worked in it at that time, and I had already lost an aunt to it, and nobody knew what I was talking about when I would talk about it. But do you feel like in those years that have passed now, has the stigma changed? Are people more open?
Oh, I think absolutely. Yeah. And I think, movies like Still Alice, mm-hmm. Glenn Campbell, being so open about his illness, Tony Bennett being so open about it.
Mm-hmm.
It has, Sandra Day O'Connor admitted that she had Alzheimer's. So definitely, I think the stigma has lifted quite a bit. But I think there is some, I think there's some embarrassment, mm-hmm. When you have a loved one who has dementia, because you don't know what they're going to do. You don't know what they're going to say. And, and there are other versions of dementia, like Lewy body dementia, that are much more volatile, or frontotemporal dementia, which is really kind of the worst mm-hmm. one. Mm-hmm. That are very volatile and very unpredictable. And, frontotemporal dementia, people can get very over-sexualized and grab onto people. And so there's, stigma aside, there is the reality of just the embarrassment and the stress of, I don't know what this person's going to do,
That is stressful. I remember being behind people saying, I'm so sorry, my father is sick, when I would take him shopping for my mother for their anniversary or something. He'd walk right into a store and say, this is bullshit. Can't you help me? And there was a line, and I was like, oh no, and everyone looked at me like, oh, how rude. And I, literally I was behind going, I'm sorry, he's ill. So I couldn't agree with you more. And that is so stressful for the caregiver.
Yeah.
Which means then what happens is you retreat, and then you're isolated, right? You're isolated at home in fear of going out. So there's got to be a better solution for this, I think.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. So obviously you got a lot of value from support groups. Did you have support? Were you in support groups prior?
No, not at all. I mean,
there was nothing available.
There weren't. I just, in 2011, because in the years since my father died, mm-hmm. people would come up to me sometimes and would tell me very intimate things about what they were going through with their loved one. And it became really, it became so clear to me that they didn't have, and that there wasn't enough support for caregivers. And 3:00 in the morning one night, I woke up and I thought, I'm going to start a support group. Mm-hmm. And I Googled Alzheimer's support groups, and I didn't find many. And, I knew right out of the gate that I wanted it to be at a hospital. I wanted that connection, I wanted something really healthy and positive to be in an environment where that people are. I'm terrified of hospitals, by the way. I mean, when I said to friends, I'm gonna, run this at a hospital, they went, "You? Like you're gonna faint when you walk in the door." But I didn't. And I was very lucky. I took it to UCLA when David Feinberg was there, and he saw the wisdom of it right away, which is why I dedicated Floating in the Deep End to him.
Mm-hmm.
Wouldn't it be brilliant? My dad was diagnosed at Stanford, wonderful facility. I can't say enough about Frank Longo and his team, really just star quality. But the reality was when he was diagnosed, I said, okay, what's the plan? Like plan A, plan B, what are we going to try? We live 15 minutes away. I can be here for appointments. Let's set those up now. We don't really need an appointment. And there are certain things you can do like Namenda or Aristat to mask the progression. It doesn't slow the progression, it masks it. Wouldn't it be nice if I was given and my mother was given a card? Here's our support group.
Yeah.
We really highly recommend you reach out because you're going to support. You don't know what's around the corner. This is not a gradual decline. He's going to go down in steps. One day he's going to wake up, which he did, and he didn't walk again. So that would be my dream. And so anybody out there that has any connections beyond Alzheimer's, I actually have it right here. I've read it and I've looked at it, is a wonderful solution for caregivers, especially at diagnosis. The Alzheimer's Association is fabulous and a resource, but I went on their website and I cried for 3 hours. I thought, where do I go? What do I do? It would be so brilliant to give you a support group out of the chute. So you're not just scrambling, as you say, floating in the deep end. Yeah. Mm-hmm. And I hope you read this when Robert comes back, or I'm going to have to interrupt you again. But you talk about how you're just treading water and you're not drowning, but you're not sustaining. You're just surviving. And that to me was so descriptive about that.
Yeah. So many caregivers say they get a diagnosis and they're just sent on their way. They would, without any advice or explanations or resources, call the Alzheimer's Association. I mean, that's so simple.
Well, I quoted a doctor in the book, and I did not name him, and I'm not going to name him now, but I quoted a doctor in the book when I was in the middle of moving my support group from UCLA to St. John's. And this doctor said to me, Alzheimer's is the least profitable area of medicine. Mm. I mean, it's a horrible thing to say, but what's really horrible is he's not the only person in medicine who feels that way. They look at the bottom line, and there's no cure, no treatment.
It's custodial care, which isn't a moneymaker.
Yeah, but where David Feinberg was so brilliant was when I came to him and I had this idea, and I said, this is going to be financially lucrative for you, because people are going to look at this hospital and go, well, if this hospital cares this much for caregivers, that's where I want to be if I'm sick. I mean, there were people I know who went to UCLA for totally unrelated things, for cancer, one person, and somebody else had a minor stroke, and they went there because they wanted to be in an environment that understood that, you have to somehow provide care for caregivers as well. It made their humanity more visible.
Mm-hmm.
I actually don't know a caregiver that has not suffered health problems. And some of them are horrible, like stroke and heart attack and things like that.
Cancer.
It is, oh, for sure, 100%. There's no doubt. So we have a question here that was written in from the audience, and that is just, if you could just say in a nutshell, how did your journey with Alzheimer's affect you? And how does that continue to affect you as Patti Davis?
I think well, as I said before, it certainly made me grow up, but I think it gave me more compassion, more understanding for other people. I think it opened up avenues in me that wouldn't have been opened up before. I think it enabled me to take a step back and look at the bigger picture of things. Because if you are really going to learn from this journey, you have to do that. In the same way, if you go to an art gallery, you don't walk up to a painting and look at it from 6 inches away. You step back and you look at the whole picture. Because if your perception of Alzheimer's is, this is horrible, this is the worst disease, this is just a terrible experience, and it's unfair, and why did my loved one get it, and why didn't that guy down the street get it because he's really mean, then that's going to be your experience, your experience of the experience, right? If instead you take a step back and say, okay, I don't know everything that's going to happen here, but my loved one, as they drift farther in this disease, doesn't seem to be hurting. They actually seem to be okay where they are. So let me take a look at that too. And let me also recognize that there are a lot of colors to grief. There are a lot of colors on the palette. And just because I'm sad and I'm grieving doesn't mean that I can't also have a life, that I can't laugh sometimes, that I can't go out with my friends. You know, I don't have to sacrifice everything in my life because something sad is happening in my life. You know, it broadens your view of things. So I think that's probably the most profound thing. I learned to take a step back and go, okay, let me just look at more aspects of this.
You know, you bring up such a good point. We talked about hills and valleys, and I tried desperately to find levity in some of my dad's progression. And I know that you've talked about that too. And for everybody out there, if you can do it, because it's just a release. And it also taught me to be more patient. Like patience is every part of it. What about guilt?
Yeah, you know, I had one of my co-facilitators said a wonderful thing, and I quoted him in this book. He said, the antidote for guilt is gratitude. And I thought that was really wonderful.
Oh.
I thought that was a great thing, you know, that, you know, you're feeling guilty over like, well, I didn't get this right, or I can't do this, or I can't fix this for them. Well, how about being grateful for the fact that you're there? And by the way, how about being grateful for the fact that you get time with your loved one? It is called the long goodbye, but there is a beauty to that. You get to say goodbye to that person, and they get to say goodbye to life as they knew it. You know, we live in a country and in a time when there are mass shootings every week. Those people didn't get to say goodbye to anybody, and their loved ones didn't get to say goodbye to them. Their lives were over in a split second. So I think, again, that's a stepping back thing of saying, okay, there's a lot that's really hard in this, and there's a lot that's really painful in this, but there are things that I can feel grateful for here.
Oh, I love that. I'm writing that in the book now. Grateful over guilt, because I hear such a common thread from people. You know, I just feel guilty. I can't do enough. I'm trying to take care of my mother, you know, who's the caregiver. And sometimes I love my brother, and sometimes I can't stand him because it's 100% on me. But to be grateful for the relationships that you have in the time. That's wonderful. And I love this question. I love your advice. Go with the moment for dementia, on where they drift to. Does this give caregivers peace? And I think you have a great example on this one too.
Which example are you referring to?
Because when your father would drift off, I know that you used something about this in the book, and how you felt so grateful that he was in a place that he was happy when you can see that really on his face.
Yeah, I didn't know I gave a few examples in here, so I didn't know which one you were referring to. Actually late in his disease, again, when he was already bedridden, he was lying in bed and he was going like this with his hands. And the nurse said to me, I wonder what he's doing. And I said, he's writing. He wrote English, and you hold your reins in both hands when you write English. I said, he's writing. So in his mind, you know, he was out somewhere in Green Meadows riding his horse. And that's what I mean. You know, if you take a step back, they're not suffering usually wherever they've drifted off to. You know, I gave another example in here of somebody in my support group who said his mother was in a facility, and he said, you know, when I go to visit her, she's always just sitting by the window staring out, and the people in the facility said she doesn't really interact very much with the other residents. And he said, I feel awful because I'm the only company that she has. I'm the only interaction that she has. She just like is sitting there staring at the window. It makes me so sad and guilty and all of that. And I said, hold on. I said, you have no idea where she's drifted off to in her mind. She could be walking on a beach in the Bahamas with some gorgeous man at sunset, and then you show up and ruin the whole thing. Right? You don't know where they've drifted off to.
Yeah.
What? Does she look okay? Does she look happy? He said, yeah. And I said, well, there you go.
Yeah.
There's nothing to be sad about for in that moment for that, you know. She seems fine. Then she probably wherever she is, she's fine.
Yeah.
Agreed. Robert, would you like to join us again?
Can I say something?
Yes.
Along the line.
Uh-oh, her audio stopped. Oh.
I didn't know if I froze or Mary Ann froze. Oh, there you are. You're back. You're back a little bit. Well, Mary Ann, you're welcome.
I froze? I'm sorry.
You froze a little bit.
We didn't hear you. But go ahead again. Technology. Go ahead.
Yeah. So Kate Swaffer, one of our authors, an Australian, she has Alzheimer's early onset. She's had it for many years. She's very active in dementia world. And she gets very angry when we say, you know, people with dementia or Alzheimer's are suffering. She says, we are not suffering. Caregivers may be suffering or the family may be suffering, but we are not suffering. And so she wants to change that whole idea that people with dementia are suffering.
Yeah.
Oh, I love that. Everybody know that. Well, welcome back, Robert. Mary Ann and I are going to go ahead and depart for now. But thank you again, audience. Thank you, Patti. And thank you, Mary Ann. Take care.
Thank you.
Patti, we were hoping that perhaps you could read a little segment from your book, Floating in the Deep End. That would help us. For some of us, maybe who haven't read the book, would give them a little introduction.
Yeah, I'll just read like 2 paragraphs here. Sure. You will never learn the lessons that Alzheimer's can teach if you're still locked inside your own history. I've heard terrible stories about how a son or daughter was treated by a parent, tales of physical and emotional violence, deliberate cruelty, banishment because of sexual orientation, even threats made with weapons. Then that parent is diagnosed with dementia. There is an opportunity here to walk away from the past and bolt the doors behind you. You won't forget what happened, but you don't have to reside there. As dementia claims your parent, you might learn a lot about how they came to be that person, and that's the doorway to forgiveness. When I got the news of my father's diagnosis, one of my earliest thoughts was that I had to get this right. I'd gotten so many things wrong in my life, especially with my family. I had to get this one right. It's not the worst thought, but I knew I was weighed down by my past, especially when it came to my parents. I felt that much of what had gone wrong in my family was probably my fault, even though truthfully, there was plenty of blame to go around. I was in my 40s, but part of me was still the sulking, self-conscious teenager sent off to boarding school with not a lot of friends, the girl who seemed to fumble her way through life. I knew I couldn't simply tell that girl to shut up and go away. I had to deal with her. I had to figure out why she felt like that, but from the perspective of an adult who had learned some things along the way and who was in fact fully capable of being a grown-up.
Thank you. Thank you.
Welcome.
We are getting some questions here as well. I thought one is poignant because it comes from a young woman. And she says, you know, my dad was diagnosed with Alzheimer's 2 years ago and is sadly progressing rapidly. And as a daughter, how do you cope with the grief of losing the relationship that is so idealized between a father and a daughter? I feel like the weight of sadness is constant. And it's just so poignant and reflective of this journey that this young woman is going through. You know, perhaps only 27 and her father, you know, and she has to embrace this journey. It's hard. It's hard.
So what anchored me, one of the first things that I thought of when my father was diagnosed was that I did not believe his soul could be sick. I did not believe his soul could have Alzheimer's. And, you know, if that doesn't comport with someone's religious or spiritual beliefs, that's fine. I understand that. And if that's the case, then my response to that is consider the possibility. Consider the possibility that there is a soul and that you don't know it's not true. So just consider it, because it will change how you deal with that person. Yes, you are losing the type of relationship that you had with them, but you can develop another relationship with them, really in some ways on a deeper level, because in that stripping away that happens with dementia, you're going to get to know them in ways that you couldn't have before. You know, we all develop personas in this life. We all sort of have layers and protective layers that we develop as we go through life. And as dementia strips things away, as I said before, you're down to the essence of that person. So you can get to know that parent in ways that are surprising. And so it's not that, I think if you say, well, I can't have a relationship with them anymore, you're cheating yourself by saying that, because then you're deciding that that's true. Whereas in fact, you can, it's going to be different. It's going to be a different relationship. But I know from my experience with my father, it was a deeper relationship.
Right. As we referred to yesterday, the notion of gratitude becomes, again, once important. And it's a deep, and as you mentioned, it's a deeper type of relationship or a different relationship that gets created. From your personal experience, and you know, you've shared some with us today, but what is the value of sharing these stories, you know, for our caregiving audience?
Well, I think the first value of it is that people feel less alone.
Yes.
You know, it's like, oh, she felt like that too. She went through that too, right? So it's not just me, and I'm not alone. And I think also it gives people permission to look at things in a different way, sometimes with humor. You know, listen, the truth of the matter, I mean, when I was running my support group, we laughed a lot in there. He cried too, but we laughed a lot in there. People with dementia do funny things sometimes.
Sure.
Now, you don't want to talk about that with everybody, you know, just anybody, because some people might think that you're laughing at them, but you're not laughing at them. You're just laughing because it's funny. And when someone with dementia does something funny and you laugh, usually they start laughing too. They might not even know why they're laughing, but they're laughing, you know? So it's I think in sharing stories, it gives people more permission to, as I said, to look at their experiences through a different lens.
Right. One of the things that we've mentioned this before, you talk about the alchemy of the process. Like here, you know, it's not a transmutation of metals to gold, but it's a transmutation of emotions into, you know, refining those emotions or understanding new emotions. But you use that word alchemy in a number of your writings, and it always just struck me as being a very powerful understanding of the element of change.
Yeah, and I think the way you get to that alchemy is back again to that I don't know thing. You know, I don't know what's going to happen here. I don't know how I'm going to feel, you know, and so you allow organically the emotions that need to come up in you. I think it's very important when it comes to grief. You know, we have a lot of trouble with grief. We don't want to go there. We feel like we're going to drown in those waters. You know, we all feel like that. And I think, you know, there's this feeling like if I push grief away, you know, out to the South 40 and leave it out there, that it will disintegrate. But grief doesn't work like that. It's not biodegradable. It will wait for you and it will come find you. And if it has to come find you, it will bring you to your knees until you deal with it. And I've seen that happen to people. They either get ill, they have an accident, something that makes them have to sit there and deal with their grief. So it's better to deal with it from the beginning and all the way through as it comes up. And there is an alchemy to that. And sometimes you do feel like you're drowning, but you will get to the other side.
Right. And the Greeks sort of spoke of that as a catharsis. And there is a catharsis or life review or, or cathartic experience that happens as a result of that grief. And I think that's incredibly profound. And I think as a society, as a culture, we're very good at bringing residents into communities, but the process of leaving communities and leaving, and dying is not something that we understand as well as we can. And so there's much to be learned,
there is,
and from our residents too.
I mean, listen, we grieve because we loved, we grieve over someone because we love them. And grief can be a complicated thing, because if you're losing a parent, say to dementia, who you did not get along with, and really you didn't like very much, but you've shown up for this disease, your grief is going to be different than someone who was very close with that parent. And that's, then you have to deal with some guilt of that, right?
Right.
It's like, I feel guilty that I don't have that sweetness of grief that someone else has. Well, okay, you don't. But someone pointed out to me a long time ago that actually they pointed out to me because I was talking to them about my mother. It was after my father died. And I said, I don't think I'm going to grieve the same way over my mother. We have a very different relationship. And she said to me, Patti, you've been grieving all your life over not having a close relationship with your mother. And that is what it felt like. I had to listen to my own words when my mother died. And I had to step back and go, I don't know how I'm going to feel. I don't know what's going to happen here. And, there were times that I cried like a baby and surprised myself. And I realized that it was that trail of grief that I'd held on to for a long time. It was very different from what I felt over my father, but it was still a version of grief, and I still had to accept it and move through it.
Thank you. One of the other questions that came up was how you handle, or how does one handle odd behaviors as paranoia or having delusions for residents who are part of this journey.
Right. So what you don't do is try to tell them they're not having that delusion or that hallucination. I gave an example in this book of a friend of mine whose friend has Lewy body dementia, which includes hallucinations typically. And one of hers was that there were men on the roof. And he called me and he said, my friend is like, keeps saying there are men on the roof. And I keep telling her that there are no men on the roof. And I said, well, stop doing that. Because she sees them. She sees them, she hears them. To her, they're real. Instead, participate in it with her. I know, I saw them too. But you know what? I chase them away. They're gone now. But if they come back, you let me know and I'll chase them away again. Just go with it. Right? Just go with it rather than make them wrong or argue with them. Because if someone, like I said, if someone's having an hallucination or if someone's having a delusion of some other kind, to them, that is real. You don't want to try to throw cold water on it and go, no, you're wrong. What's that going to get you? Just go with it, play with it, and, try to get them through it that way.
Thank you. Patti, it has been a fabulous afternoon. I want to thank you, for just sharing with us a wealth of insightful information and just passionate remembrances and experiences. And your books are really chock full of that. And I think it's very important for our listeners to participate in that journey. And I want to thank all of the participants this afternoon that have attended this webinar. And Marianne and Susan for moderating and positing important questions that we need to be conscious of. And thank you, all for your efforts, dedication, and passionate commitment to, providing knowledge and support for caregiving. And here, we at the Kensington are honored to partner with All's Authors, and you're part of that group, and we look forward to having future seminars. But thank you so much again, Patti.
Thank you so much for having me. I really enjoyed it. Thank you.